All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, it is Wheel of Time Day, and we were overthinking the Forsaken, but we're pivoting to Rand because we're contrasting him with Ishy, which we did last time. And we got a new subscriber, Finns. We're going to read your comment, go over that because we like to rehash what we did last time. It makes for a good review. Uh, what else we're going
Yes,
to do?
we are at the perfect number of subscribers, so thank you for watching, but we no longer need you to subscribe. Um,
No, we need more. This was the landmark. The next is 100. Now we can get to the regular numbers, but
uh,
we had to get the giggity number.
we need subscribers in multiples of 10 so we can keep that perfect number. Anyway, so let's start with comments. And Ideals had one that we meant to bring up last time, and it's quasi related because he makes a reference to Wheel of Time, analogy to the Wheel of Time, and I just wanted to address it real quick since we forget. So from our Super Bowl discussion, where we talked about also uh, what's been going on in the first few weeks of the Trump administration. So Ideal says, I was watching Trump's press conference after Tulsi Gabbard's swear in, and he mentioned that Doge went from, quote, 12 geniuses, end quote, to 20 to almost 100, with people joining every day. Guys, Doge is the Black Tower. Watch out for Muskim Taim. And that's a good point. Is one of the I believe, and I think I can objectively say that one of the top five U.S. presidents ever was Reagan, and he had a
Hmm.
saying, "Trust but verify." So
Hmm.
yeah, we're going to enter into these negotiations and treaties with the Soviet Union, but we know that they have been lying and breaking these treaties for 50 years, so we're going to trust but verify. So
Yeah, and I think there's because it's a two-step process, this is where it comes in. Uh this is not new with Musk. This is
mhm,
exactly what he did with Twitter. It's called what did BizDoc call it? Zero something restructure.
mhm,
Basically, you burn it to the ground and then you reinsert the good things and
mhm.
then add other good things. And so that's the stage we're in. And it's pretty obvious that that's what he's doing, which is giving some fuel to the lefty fire of, oh, you're cutting these good things and they can point to them, which gives them
Yeah.
a little PR fire. But at the same time, it's not a surprise looking at who it is, and we can debate on whether that approach was needed or not. But the second step is where Doge has to take a step back, and then we have to have a new face putting the stuff back in.
Yeah.
Because the problem with anybody is going to be their bias. I bet you we're not going to get a whole lot of Space Force cuts, right?
Mm.
Because Musk, I bet you he's not going to dive too deep into the EV subsidies, right? So obviously those are his bias. He owns Tesla, he owns SpaceX, Starlink probably benefits from all of it. Uh,
And even giving the benefit of the doubt and putting a positive spin on it, even if it's not, the greed of, hey, this helps Tesla, it's he started Tesla because he believes in this.
mhm.
So
Which
he
is
is a believer in the EV movement.
which is where the coalition comes in because they've also talked about Ron Paul jumping into the process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And someone like Ron Paul and Tom Sowell and Roland Fryer coming in and saying Roland Fryer would be perfect, especially with education. I wish he was the Secretary of Education
Mm-hmm.
because his common sense school programs worked and they're way cheaper than what we're doing now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
someone like him, and he's one of the best economists in the country. So someone like him, Glenn Lowry, or one of those people to come in, Milton Friedman proteges,
Mm-hmm.
come in and start doing the ad back in and make
Yeah.
sure that we're doing the right things with our money. So yeah, come in with your chainsaw that Malay gave you and do your thing, then relinquish the power and go back to trying to get us to Mars. Okay.
Exactly. It's watch out for because he could be, but he could also be low gain.
Hmm.
But we don't know yet, so you'd better keep an eye on it and don't do. We're going to be talking about Rand today.
Well,
Don't
and
do what
Rand's
Rand did and
mistake
say,
was he
"Not my
took
thing."
his eyes off. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. So don't take your eyes off of what is going
What
on.
we do have though is a massive. We saw how powerful independent media was. Uh, we have eyes in the Black Tower.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And unlike Taim, he's posting everything he's doing anyways.
Yeah, that's true. It's so far they are being transparent, which they've talked about, which RFK Jr. has talked
Mhm.
about is no, we're going to have transparency.
Now, I
So,
will add one other layer, and maybe we can do a whole episode on this, and I'll stop with this. One other layer that is worrisome. It's good in one way, but it's worrisome in another. The last 2 days revelation on the Epstein list since Cash was confirmed. They're on the desk. They're ready to be released. The Epstein and the Diddy files. There's a lot of powerful people in there. Are we going to get a limited hangout and there's going to be some sacrifices, but they're still going to hold back, which is probably what's going to happen because they're the government. You can't trust them completely. There's going to be some sacrificial lambs and a lot of the real power players are going to be spared. Or are we get this is what you worry about with a new regime taking over and gaining too much power is there might be enough in there to just blast everything that exists and then put your own people in.
mm,
How many senators are in there? How many Congress people are in there? How many million billionaire business people are in there? How many entertainment moguls are in there? It's going to be a lot because that was the circle. They all ran together.
all right. So our new commenter is Finns. Wait, does that mean he's one of the Finnses? That's disconcerting. Um, Good discussion. Longtime reader since the early 90s, probably somewhere around 2 dozen rereads, and was an avid multiple forum goer for years. Here's my personal breakdown of The Forsaken. 11 of the 13 are fighting to be the quote unquote favorite son to carve out as much power as the Dark One will give them. Lanfear doesn't just want what the Dark One can give her, she wants his power, period. And as an aside, we're going to get into this kind of deep, and this is going to be kind of a preview of when we get to Lanfear, because one of the comments from the interview database that I've got queued up here, it Jordan talks about Lanfear a lot and has some interesting things to say in a letter he wrote in response to a fan letter way back in the 90s.
Yeah, and
Um,
and and I'll take that the layer forward further, and then we'll put a pin in it for that bigger discussion. She doesn't want what he can give her. He wants to use him,
mm,
not only to gain power, but for revenge.
yeah. Ishamael, on the other hand, doesn't even want power for himself. He wants to break the wheel and end his own existence. As you mentioned, he just wants nothingness. He wants it all to just end. Um, as another aside, interestingly, as we talked about last time, and kind of going off of Sanderson's comment about the evolution of the character during the series, it is interesting to note and wonder how much of that nihilism, what was the percentage, maybe this is a better way to say it, is what percentage of Ishamael's psyche at the when he was Ishamael Balsamon was nihilistic, and then how much more when he became Morden?
Mhm.
Because when Morden shows up, and how much did that death and then having to be reborn, not just reborn, but knowing it? Because yes, he has this insight as he tells Rand early on in the form of Balsamon. We've done this for time immemorial. You know, we have for forever we have been battling, you and I, Luce Theron.
But that insight is philosophizing.
Exactly.
It's not actually experiencing.
Now, since this soul was, before it could be returned to the wheel to be reborn, was shoved into another body, he remembers all of his time as Alon, as Shamael Balsamon, and his death. Ugh, and now we're here we go again. So how much did that impact? How much did that increase that nihilism that was already there?
Well, look what we see in real life, how near death experiences change people's lives.
Mhm. Back to the comments. The thing is, once you start to really dig into Ishii, you start to realize he was hands down the most effective and truly dangerous of all the Forsaken by miles. Shamael was not fully sealed and was able to, quote, touch the world, end quote, every 1,000 years for about 40 years at a time, starting right at the end of the Eye of the World prologue, just a few years after Luz sealed him up. I don't think it was a few years. I think it was immediately. Because as I understand it, the 100 companions were immediately struck with the full madness because they were so close to the Dark One that counterstroke affected them immediately. Um,
Yeah,
but
but they
I
did have to have some time to break shit.
Yes. So that is coming from the Big White Book and some of the glossaries and the companion is revealed in there that is about every 1,000 years for about 40 years, Shamael was able to step out of the seal, out of the bore, and do stuff. Um, Corrections, Hawkwing had nothing to do with the Trolloc Wars, and Ashamil had nothing to do with Shadar Logoth. Yeah, we corrected that in real time, that they were about 1,000 years apart. But I think what
Yeah.
Sam was saying is Ishamil indirectly created Shadow Logoth, which is part of the interestingness of the age lace, is that
Mhm.
he accidentally, by starting the Trolloc Wars, turned Eridhol into Shadow Logoth, which gave Rand the ability to cleanse the taint, which was a big effing deal.
Yeah, but in real time,
Um,
I did get the timeline wrong, putting
yeah.
Hawkwing in that same conversation.
The ending of the Trolloc Wars came about due to the disappearance of the organizer. Ishy's 40 years ran out, along with the human forces' improved proficiency in fighting them. Shadow Logoth was created by human evil, not the Dark One, by the pattern to provide the dragon a way to cleanse Sidon 2,000 years later. It's unclear exactly when Ishamael created the Black Ajah. Most believe
Let's
during.
back up before that.
Okay.
One, it's not just human innovation. You talked about the age lace and the intricacy of it. Remember, one of the pivotal times was the explosion of Minatherin,
Uh,
which created the place the dragon needed to be raised.
mm, mhm. Yeah, adding to the complexity there.
Mhm.
The pattern turning the evil, the manipulation that Ashamael in the shadow was trying to create, and turning it using the results of that for its own ends.
Which is going to be a theme of my part of the discussion with Rand, because I'm going to just throw these words in here because they're going to keep coming up. This is proof that the pattern is neutral.
Jordan says as much in one of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the comments I'm going to read. The creator is not, but the pattern is.
Hmm.
Um, Most believe during the Trolloc Wars, but it can't be ruled out that it was right before the breaking. A 1,000 years later, Ishamael returns, finding his way into Hawkwing's covenants, influencing him against the Aes Sedai, resulting in the sieging of Tar-Valon and the implementing of the Three Oaths, greatly shortening the lifespans and possible accomplishments of the Aes Sedai. Ishamael then convinced him to break up his forces and send a large portion of it across the ocean with corrupted versions of the Carathon cycle, ensuring conflict upon their return, finally killing Hawkwing before his own time ran out. I would add indirectly killing Hawkwing, because I don't remember who says this. I think it may be Balsamon bragging at some point that as he was dying from some unknown ailment, possibly from something Ishamael did to him, his closest advisors told him the only way you can be saved, High King, is with Aes Sedai healing, and he had those advisors executed. So yeah, uh, Ishamael made sure that chaos resulted from Hawkwing's attempt at order, because he broke up his forces, which contributed to him not being able to break Tar-Valon. And then also it meant that there were, with one of his sons, I think his eldest son, going across the sea, it created a power vacuum when he died, an immediate civil war that 200 to 300 years, I think, is how long the what did they call it? Is it the time of troubles? I can't remember what they call it, but it's analogous to, it's very reminiscent of a similar period in Chinese history that I think was one of the influences for that, where you had this very strong ruler bring all these warring kingdoms together. But then when he died, there wasn't a similar successor, and it immediately devolved into hundreds of years. Same thing happened in Japanese as well. Anyway, back to the comment. 1,000 years later, right before the time of Rand, he begins organizing the Blight in preparation for the Dragon Reborn, creates Slayer, uses Farstrider to drop the clue that leads Moraine and company to the Eye of the World, and kills the leader of the Black Ajah for hunting and killing all children born when the Dragon Reborn was. That's part of what New Spring is, and you get some more of that from the companions. That Ishamael gets pissed off because no, I need the Dragon Reborn to be reborn, you idiots. That's part of the plan here. Um, Otherwise, the cycle just continues. At the end of the day, Ashamael constantly promoted chaos, setting back progress. I think that's an important point,
Mhm.
and keeping the world from ever really solidifying so that when the dragon returned, he wouldn't have a unified base, only a splintered and fractured world. That goes right into some of the comments we're going to read from Jordan here in a little bit. Should also be noted that it's most likely Lanfear faked her death at the end with Perrin. This is new and I hadn't heard this, and I haven't I resisted the urge to go down this rabbit hole and said, no, I focus. I'll go down this rabbit hole later. You can look up Sanderson's responses to that theory and make your own conclusions. So Finns, if you have some threads and could throw that in a link to this episode, that would be awesome because I had not heard this before. I'm really interested in this, but it's entirely plausible because of that melding of the real world and the world of dreams and how powerful Lanfear is in Teleron Riyadh
Mhm.
that actually I could see that happening. That if she saw that coming, that oh crap, as a last resort, fake her own death and well, I didn't get what I wanted here, but I live to fight another day.
What?
I could see that.
Yeah, and drawing your own conclusions. If it wasn't Perrin, I would be more apt to say that. But because Perrin had become so strong as well, you would think he would have kind of figured it out. Had it been, Nynaeve killing her or someone like that, then you could understand she would be completely ignorant. But
That's a good point, and uh, a a a point in that column, if we're doing a plus minus kind of review here, would be Egwene taking out I'm brain farting. Who was the one in the tower? Which
uh,
Forsaken was that?
oh, Masana.
The way she takes her out in the world of dreams, and there is a argument to be made that Perrin is even stronger
Mhm.
in
Well,
the
not
world of
only
dreams than
that,
Egwene
he would
is.
if she leaped away in the world of dreams and left like an image of herself that was dead, he would have smelled it because remember he could smell where someone went.
Yeah. So that's why I'm curious, if someone has, put this out in long form like we used to do in the old days for us old timers like you, Finns, who remember, you know, being multiple forum goers. I was mostly on Theory Land, but I did look around on Dragon Mount some too. Um, and I miss the old days of somebody writing out a freaking essay with sources and footnotes because we were that big of nerds
Yeah,
about
but
this stuff.
before the internet, I'm with you. I started in the early 90s and I started with book 3 on accident because I found
Hmm.
it. And I loved it
Yeah.
so much that I might have got the first one by 5 finger discount. And I was poor, okay? It doesn't justify it, but it is what happened. You should be impressed. You know how thick that book is?
Hey, we were pretty good at sneaking uh snacks into movie theaters, so
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, actually, this will segue into the interview database because I had to look this up and I had forgotten how quickly the first handful of books came out, and then as the books got bigger individually, but also as the plot got bigger, and it took him longer to write. Because one of the quotes from Jordan that I'm going to read here is from a letter he wrote in response to a fan letter from 1994. And I had to look up to say, wait, what book would that have been? And the first two books came out in 1990. And then Dragon Reborn was 91, Shadow Rising was 92, Fires of Heaven was 93, Lord of Chaos comes out in October of 94. And then after that, it starts to be 2 or 3 years between books. Um, Anywho, so keep that in mind when I'm reading through this, is that at the point where Jordan is responding to this fan letter and her questions, and I wish we had the question, not just the response, uh, that this is through book 5 that he's talking about. But we're it occurs to me that depending on how many rabbit holes we go down and what we talk about here, this may end up having to be 2 episodes because, just for instance, besides the fact there's a lot to talk about with Rand, um, if you go to the Rand tag in the Theoryland interview database, there are 451 entries. I made it
And
through
that's
the first 10.
threads. That's not posters, right?
That is instances of Jordan or Sanderson answering a question that involves Rand. Now, a lot of those are repeats, and a lot of those things are things like how tall is everybody, because
Mm-hmm.
he talks about the height and he gives specifics. So there's a
Six
lot
foot
of that. But
six.
yep, but then there's a lot of deep stuff, giggity, that and that's the two main ones I'm going to get into here. But first, a little bit of lightheartedness. Is somebody at a crossroads of Twilight signing asked, "What advice would you give Rand concerning his relationship with Aviendha, Min, and Elaine?" And this is Jordan's answer: "Step very carefully. It's hard enough for a man to deal with one woman at a time, since we aren't really equipped mentally to keep up without a lot of effort. A man could get trampled very easily trying to keep up with three, not least because they have their own relationship with one another. And no matter what he does, he will not ever in a million years be able to understand that, or be able to avoid cutting his own throat on it. Luckily for him, I do, and I can. For him, anyway."
Well, yeah, I guess that's the power of being able to sit and write and rewrite the responses instead of having to deal with them in real time. Actually, I think he has a bigger job, a harder job than someone who's cheating, because of the fact they know each
Mm-hmm.
other exist and they know each other and have their own relationships. Uh, where one is just subterfuge, and the other is actually having to deal with the personalities and the relationships, because we all have as Jung would say, we all have different archetypes within us, and w- one of them he would call the shadow, and all of these things. Maybe the shadow is the one that makes you stray, or maybe it's a part of you that was missing in your standard relationship. You can actually become those different people with different people, and that's easy
Mm-hmm.
to do. So the only real struggle there is to hide the other people in that situation. Whereas with Rand, they all know each other, and he can be that different person with them, which is he actually does. In fact, we see the struggle when he tries to not change who he is. Like Min tries to get through and make him be the sheep herder that she loved, but he's trying to be the steel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's when he starts getting in trouble, is when he doesn't partition his different personalities with these different people. Had he done that from the beginning, he actually probably would have navigated it quite well. But because he tried to treat them all the same, he almost ruins it all and destroys the world.
Yep. Um, so the fourth entry here on the database is interesting, and it's going backwards because I somehow missed this when we talked about what happened at the very end of the series there, and what was going on with that, as Sanderson and Harriet put it, a kind of new magic um for the new age. So somebody asked a question at the same crossroads of Twilight signing about Tavarinness. Does Tavarinness ebb and flow as needed? If Rand, Matt, and Perrin were all Tavarin growing up, it seems that the two rivers would have had a lot of odd events occurring, but no mention is made of it. Here's Jordan's answer. You might say that Tavarinness ebbs and flows. For one thing, remember that even for someone like Rand, the effects are really occasional, not continuous. Okay, now as an aside, remember what is he doing after his moment of self realization, self actualization on Dragonmount? It actually isn't occasional. It is continuous, and he's able to push the pattern, so to speak. Well, even before that, actually, you could say the same thing on the scarred side of the Two-Face coin, because he kind of does that with his meeting with the Empress, may she live forever. But he kind of does an imitation of the goodness that he does, say, with the apple orchard with her, only he's projecting shadow and darkness. Uh, so there is something different happening there. But remember, this is Jordan speaking at a Crossroads of Twilight signing when we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, darn it, I wish we could ask him these questions now, and he'd probably just give us a lot of read and find out, because these are things he wouldn't want to reveal because he
Mm-hmm.
likes the mystery. Anyway, back to the answer. Even when he is causing dozens of coincidences in a particular place, many more events pass off quite normally. For another thing, no one is born Ta'veren. Ranmat and Perrin only became Ta'veren just before Moiraine appeared. You become Ta'veren according to the needs of the wheel, like the heroes linked to the wheel who are spun out as needed to try and keep the weaving of the pattern straight. A man or woman becomes Ta'veren because the wheel has decided, quote unquote, to use them as an influence on the pattern. And no, the wheel isn't sentient. Think more of a fuzzy logic device that uses feedback to correct what it is doing in order to do it in the most efficient way. So that's going backwards a little bit, but I thought I would go ahead and throw that out there because it popped up and was interesting. Um, but now, before we get to the meat of what we wanted to talk about, and since we are diving too deep and overthinking and bringing in Nietzsche and Dostoevsky here,
I don't
there,
think it's overthinking because I have a
mm,
feeling Jordan was well studied in them, and add
yes,
add into that he was well studied in Eastern philosophy. So so
and,
it
and that's why I was looking, and I have yet to find. I want to keep going through these, but this particular entry, this is 7 on the Rand tag on the interview database. This is paraphrased, so it's not a direct quote, but I found this one really interesting because it's talking about the influences of the Eye of the World, or of the Wheel of Time in general. And he makes a comment about the Eye of the World. Um, but I found this really interesting. And again, darn it, I wish we could ask these questions, and maybe as I dig through more in here, I'll find it. But generally, not generally, from what I have seen, anytime someone has asked about the influences, it has always been about other fiction. And technically, Dostoevsky is fiction, but it
mhm,
is philosophy and psychology is what he's doing. He's just doing it in a literary form as opposed to what Nietzsche did, which was a philosophical treatise,
mhm.
right? So he's doing it in an art form, instead of an academic form. Um, but I haven't seen anyone ask him about these except just kind of in the general, hey, Zen Buddhism and the flame, and but I haven't seen anyone ask and take deep dives into the any philosophers he may have been influenced by. And so this raises an interesting point. Um, he raised the point that and this is an interview from 1993. So this is really early on. And once again, this would be probably when the Fires of Heaven had just come out or was coming out, would be my guess, because it doesn't give the exact date, but my guess would be this is part of the publicity tour for Fires of Heaven, the 5th book. He raised the point that Rand's creeping insanity may manifest in much more subtle ways than the people of Randland expect, which leads one to wonder about Rand's increasing withdrawal and possible megalomania. Keep that in mind here in a little bit when we start to
Yeah.
talk about psychopathy.
Well, and so do you want me to bring this in now? Because the we talked in depth about how you say he's the creator's avatar, and I think I have a different opinion.
Mm.
But we also talk about the creator refusing to jump in.
Yeah.
And I think on Dragon Mount, the creator did jump in one way, and it's more nuanced than what the Dark One is trying to do. But it was in response to what the Dark One is trying to do.
Yeah. So let's tease that and get into that in a little bit. Back to the paraphrased statement here. I think he is aware of the net discussion. He expressed surprise at the amount of analysis and comparison with Tolkien, Dune, etc. And somebody in the audience compared Wheel of Time to Atlas Shrugged, which really seemed to surprise him. His attitude is that once he has written one book and publicized it, it is time to move on to the next. The only deliberate connection between Watt and any other modern fantasy was giving the first 100 odd pages of The Eye of the World a Lord of the Rings esque flavor to start people off in familiar territory.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting and worth noting. And then wondering the stuff we're going to talk about today, how much of it, if any of it, was deliberate and how much just kind of swims around in the soup that is the back of your mind, that is your subconscious, and then comes up as you start the creative process. Um, I've done a lot of writing, both fiction and, of course, lots of nonfiction in writing for undergraduate and graduate history work. And once I get into the process, I there are times where I'll look back on stuff I've written and not remember it. It'll
Mm-hmm.
seem like someone else wrote that. And I think it is, I suspect, you're the psychologist in training here, that there is something to do with the creative mind and the creative process, that when you get into what we talked about a few weeks ago, that flow state, intellectually, we talked physically, but intellectually, when you get into that flow state, I think there must be some sort of element akin to dreaming.
Yeah, well, yeah, dreams are vitally important for our memory, and they consolidate everything together. So we talk about REM sleep dreams that are just completely weird, and we love to talk about how it's because your prefrontal cortex is basically turned off, and that's when it's getting its rest, and your limbic system is going, free flow in conjunction with the hippocampus, which is not stored memory. It is what allocates and pulls and does all. It's basically like the hub for memory, to keep it overly simple. And all of these things are working together. But memory consolidation helps you with future events because it basically primes you to handle novel situations by pulling in the connections of everything you've ever experienced into that simple thought. So, say you have a dream where, here's one that reoccurs for me because it seems to be a mental problem for me in real life, is I have a task to do, but there is a very simple preliminary task that I keep struggling with to get to the ultimate task. Like I have to look up something for a question somebody asked me, but for some reason I cannot log into my phone. And so it's pulling all of these things in and it's saying, this is a thing you need to work on, or this is something you have to get better at, or here's how you get better at it. And the further in the night you get, the more from the past it pulls. So if you've ever had a weird dream where there's a lot of modern things in there, but you're doing it with your childhood friend or a dog you used to have when you were 3, that kind of stuff. And it pulls everything together. And one of the reasons it's so weird is I'm trying to remember who said this. I'll look up the source while you're doing your next monologue here. But he was talking about the why. Okay, well, how is that associated with this? He said, do a Google search and then look at what's on page 1. And I think he used the example of field hockey. He said, do field hockey in Illinois or something. and then go to page 37 and see what stories are there. They're connected to your search because there are search words that are involved in there,
Hmm.
but they have nothing to do with what you're searching for. That's what your brain is doing. Is it's
Ah.
pulling in all of those things, except there's more than 37 pages. There's every second of your life that goes into it.
Hmm.
So when you talk about memory, yeah, that's integral in using our memories to create a future self,
Which
which
is
might be something we feel underneath. So we talk about mythology coming out of human experience. String theory might be mythology from that
hmm,
experience,
hmm.
which is why it's probably breaking down, but still might have merit.
All right. So now I'm going to get to the meat of this, which and and the reason I keyed in on these two and stopped here, even though they're seemingly tangentially related to Rand, is because what Jordan is talking about here is the nature of evil, both evil within the story world, but then also his conception of the nature of evil. And he goes on in the second part here, he goes on a pretty lengthy historical diatribe of examples that are pretty damn dark. So
Dr. Matthew Walker for the credit.
okay.
Yep.
So keep that in mind here is remember this is that soup in the subconscious. His his bachelor's degree was in physics. He was a combat veteran, but he also voraciously read and loved history. So that's all swimming around back there creating this. And so you see that here right up front when he goes on this long list of horrible things from history when he's talking about the nature of evil. So this is his conception and this is where it's coming from. Uh, but the reason I think it's important to before I get to it of where I'm going with this is when we're talking about Rand and his arc as a character, he struggles in the middle of the series, and then before he fully becomes the Avatar of Light, he doesn't just do things that you would say are evil. He becomes evil. He embraces the darkness. And that is a very important part of his character arc, especially when the whole reason we're here is because we're contrasting with a Shamael who fully embraced the darkness and never once looked back, was never seemingly even tempted to look back at the light. In fact, he kind of mocks Rand when Rand a couple of times after his reintegration. So Rand, kind of in the guise of Luz Theron, we used to be friends, is kind of holding out a hand to his old friend Alon, saying it doesn't have to be this way. And Morden laughs at him, mocks him, which we'll get into when we get into the Dostoevsky example of where this aligns. But let me share, make sure I'm sharing the right screen because this is rather lengthy. Um, let me let me go ahead and share my screen here so
So
you can follow along. All right, so this is a letter.
which one? 9 or 10?
Number we're going to start with 9,
Okay.
but they're
Let
connected
let me
here.
move our faces then. All right.
Yeah. So this is a letter to one Carolyn Fusinato. In we don't have the letter he's responding to, but we have his response here. Now, about how evil the Forsaken are, I'm not really sure you define evil. Part of what I am writing about is just how ordinary evil is. In many ways, without the one power, the Forsaken would be no more than dark friends, though perhaps a bit more than ordinary. True, their callousness toward the pain, suffering, even death of ordinary people, and the way they submerge everything and everyone in their own quest for power and true immortality, their willingness to deliver the world to the Dark One in that quest, are shared by many who do not have their powers. The point is that they are human. They haven't gotten rid of human emotions or human weaknesses except for a few physical ones. They are not gods, nor even demigods, though they seek to be and think they already are. But believe me, there is nothing they will not do to achieve their goals, no price too high to pay, especially if it is paid by someone else or millions of someone else's. And Lanfear holding back and doing good for Rand's sake? Ha! She was physically fixed on possessing a man who never loved her. Put a pin in that for when
Mm-hmm.
we talk about Lanfear later. Back to Jordan. Even with that, her desire for Rand was as much a desire for power as for him. To be the one to deliver the Dragon Reborn to the services of the Shadow that would set her above the other Forsaken. And learning that the access Tyrangreal for the two huge Sawangreal were still in existence, sure, she wanted his love, not least because it had been denied her. Lanfear was a woman who claimed a right to anything she wanted his devotion. But even more than his body, Lanfear wanted power, the power to possibly replace the Dark One, even to replace the Creator. For Rand's sake, not a chance. Now, I assume this is partly in response to something that, and Finn's, you may remember this more in real time than I do, because I came along in the late 90s and early 2000s is when I was on the forums and really getting
Late
into the
90s, the last
series.
year of the 90s, because that's when we were
Yes,
up in Parker.
it
Yeah.
was fall of 98 is when we went to college, and
Mm-hmm.
I was, what are you dorks talking about in the lounge? And it was, oh, Path of Daggers. What's that? It's finally coming. What, I don't get it. And then you gave me the Eye of the World. Here, read this. Bleh. I don't know how many classes I skipped to read that series, so thanks for that. But
That's all right.
uh
That is officially my worst semester ever in school too.
yep.
So
E- e- Even by Fires of Heaven, which is when Carolyn here would have been writing, uh is after reading that, and there was a criticism that, um the line from Spaceballs but inverted, evil will always triumph because good is dumb. And there was something of a criticism for a little while that the Forsaken aren't scary, they're stupid. And Jordan's making the point, they're not dumb, they're just people.
human. Yeah.
Yeah, they're they're very powerful because of the power, but they're also susceptible to all the failings that normal humans are susceptible to. And that leads to them being overcome by Rand winning at times.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also going to go into in the second letter here that is dated a month later. Um, don't think that Rand is winning. It's okay, yeah, he has won these battles, but that doesn't mean he's won the war by a long shot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I wanted to stop there because I was rather lengthy, and the second one's even longer, and see what your thoughts were on that. And um, I I emphasize things on purpose there as I was reading because we're
Can
going,
you put it back on the screen?
yeah, we're going to get into psychopathy in particular and what that means, but then also what can drive someone to that. And you see in his he is foreshadowing here in a lot of ways, quite probably on purpose, because that's the way Jordan works. I think uh this is why I made the point earlier. I read the line about how Rand's madness is going to manifest in ways that people in Randland don't necessarily expect and may be more subtle. I think he in this letter here back in 94 is um hinting at that, foreshadowing that,
Mm-hmm.
because what he talks about here in the evilness of the Forsaken and the Dark Friends, this is what Rand is going to be drawn into.
Mm-hmm. So okay, you can put it up if you want. Uh without getting too much into land fear specifically here, which
Hmm.
it went in that direction. The psychopathy itself is, well, we know this. We can look at lesions in the brain to see this in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. That they, other than Semirage, I'm gonna put a pin on her here. I said she's uninteresting because she's like a caricature, but that's a sadist
Hmm.
versus a psychopath. Okay, other than her, because she enjoyed it. Uh, the main point there was they had their goal. Their goal was the power,
Hmm.
whatever form they wish that to be, whether it was ruling or in Asmodean's case, just being the most beloved bard in the history of all bards, making the deal with the devil, basically, which is I think that's going to be a fun episode. I can't wait for that one. Uh, but yeah, so whatever their goal was, Grendel, the pleasures that she denied herself, and now she wants control of all of that. Demandred to not be second best anymore. Uh, Semael to be to he was obsessed with order. I think he wanted that world that was. I mean, you talk about a Hitler figure. I think that was Semael.
Yeah, he was someone who was probably going to install a militocracy
Yeah,
if
where
he was
you
the ultimate
yeah you look at these
nihilist.
rallies. Everybody compares our current president to the same person. That rally is a mass of people cheering. Hitler's rallies, everybody was in a fine line. And no matter which direction you look, you could look diagonally and it made a fine line. You could look straight on, it made a fine line. Everything was complete order. And the guy was probably OCD, is one of the speculations about the man. Samael would seem to
Many
be
problems,
this,
yeah.
yeah. Samael seemed to be the same way. He wanted a world of complete order and an iron fist to kind of mitigate that. So they all had their goal, irrespective of the emotion, because the emotion felt by other people, which is what empathy does for you.
Hmm.
All of these people died for this. Sometimes that happens, and it's a good thing, as Rand has to figure out,
Hmm.
right? But Demandred, he helped facilitate a culture where dying was a good thing for it because he didn't care about them. He
Hmm.
just wanted to not be second best. Semael, he threw a lot of people to the slaughter in the fires of heaven in that battle against Rand
Hmm.
because he thought it would propel him to that place he wanted to be. Asmodean didn't care who died as long as he well, and we see it even further. He's willing to switch sides as long as he gets to where he wanted to be. My own survival and this thing I want. And I shook hands with the devil, but look, I see I'm holding on to a cliff here, and you might be the better one out of that. I don't care that you're good. I care that I live. That
Hmm.
kind of thing. So that's pure psychopathy. Uh Lanfear, we'll put Lanfear with Simmerage because she was emotionally based as well. But the yeah, it's that inability to feel what others feel. So your goals are the only thing that matter. And now you put them in places of power.
Hmm.
And when someone like that has a place of power, then bad shit happens. And the power was part of that, but also their connection to the Dark One by being some of the first to convert to him, getting that little bit of boost from whatever he provided them, whether it be
Hmm.
dark friends to work for them, because that was one of it, right? That was one of the things. The meeting with Boars, what was that other than this is the guy you have to follow and these are the things you have to do, orders from the dark.
Yeah, back to Finn's comment about how effective Ishamael was
Yeah.
at
Ishii got
sowing
an army that
chaos.
day
Yeah.
with very high profile people. We saw Aes Sedai in there, but Boars himself, I think, is an
Mm.
underrated bad guy because he was one of the most competent bad guys in the whole series.
Well, speaking of effective, that goes right into this next rather lengthy comment from Jordan. that I think is important, but also sets the Forsaken apart as individuals.
Well, let me put add another thing. If the path to that power had been good, they would have done it.
Mm,
Some of them, some of
some of
them.
them, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, does evil need to be effective to be evil? And how do you define effectiveness? Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge managed to murder about 25 to 30% of Cambodia's population. As an aside, I think a lot of people now, this was, again, 1994, a lot of people now think it was even higher than that.
Mhm.
Which, so total numbers, Stalin and Lenin killed way more of their own people.
Let,
But
let
as
me
a
pause this real quick.
percentage,
Sorry for the hiccup. Family
as a
stuff.
percentage, there's an argument to be made and has been made that Pol Pot was the worst of all of the awful communist dictators of the 20th century, which is one of the reasons I'm going to read this whole thing, um, because it's pretty awful. And it's important to remember that there is a lot of awfulness in our modern world. I mean, that's one of the reasons we read these stories, we focus on these stories. It's because of what they tell us about humanity and human nature,
Hmm.
so that when we say never again, it's not just a freaking slogan that we ignore when it becomes inconvenient. But I digress. The Khmer Rouge managed to murder about 25 to 30% of Cambodia's population, destroy the country's agriculture and industrial base, fairly well wipe out the educated class inside the country, defined as anyone with an education beyond the ability to read. A good many of those went too, of course. As an aside, if you had glasses, Pol Pot executed you because he thought you were an elitist academic
Well,
if you
good
had to
thing
wear
lasers
glasses.
exist. Oh, they didn't
Yeah,
exist then. Yeah.
nope. And in general became so rabid that only China was willing to maintain any sort of contact with them, and that at arm's length. Their rabidity was the prime reason that they ended up losing the country, that they are still around and still causing trouble. In other words, they were extremely ineffective in attaining their goal, which was to seize Cambodia, remake it in the way Pol Pot wished and still wishes, and export their brand of revolution abroad. Looking at the death toll, the city's emptied out. Hospital patients were told they had 1 hour to leave or die. Post op patients, those still in the operating room, everybody. The murders of entire families down to infants because one member of the family was suspected of counter revolutionary crimes. The max executions, one method was for hundreds of people to be bound hand and foot, then bulldozed into mass graves alive. The bulldozers drove back and forth over these mass graves until attempts to dig out stopped. Given all that, can you say that the Khmer Rouge's ineffectiveness made them less evil? Irrationality is more fearful than rationality, if we can use that term in this regard. Because if you have brown hair and know that the serial killer out there is only killing blondes, you are safe. But if he is one of those following no easily discernible pattern, if every murder seems truly random, then it could be you who will be next. But rationality can have its terrors. What if that killer is only after brunettes named Carolyn? Stalin had the very rational goal, according to communist dogma, of forcibly collectivizing all farmland in the Soviet Union. He was effective. All the land was collectivized. And to do it, he murdered some 30 million small farmers who did not want to go along. But are the Forsaken ineffective or irrational? Are they any more divided than any other group plotting to take over a country, a world, IBM? True, they plot to secure power for themselves. But I give you Stalin versus Trotsky and the entire history of the Soviet Union. I give you Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton versus John Adams. And we will ignore such things as Jefferson's hounding of Aaron Burr, he tore up the Constitution to do it, double jeopardy, habeas corpus, the whole 9 yards, or Horatio Gates's attempted military coup against Washington with the support of a fair amount of the Continental Congress. We can also ignore Secretary of War Stanton's attempts to undermine Lincoln throughout the Civil War, the New England states' attempt to make a separate peace with England during the Revolution, and their continued trading with the enemy, the British again, during the War of 1812, and the list goes on forever, frankly, and take in every country. Human nature is to seize personal advantage. And when the situation is the one the Forsaken face, namely that one of them will be given rule of the entire earth while the others will be forever subordinate, they are going to maneuver and backstab like crazy. You yourself say, quote, if ever there was the possibility that some alien force was going to invade the planet, half the countries would refuse to admit the problem. The other half would be fighting each other to figure out who will lead the countries into battle, etc. End quote. Even events like Ravine or Samuel or Belal seizing in the nation have a basis. What better way to hand over large chunks of people and land to the Dark One than to be ruler of those lands and people? The thing is that they are human. But aside from that, are you sure that you know what they are up to? All of them? Are you sure you know what the Dark One's own plans are? Now let's see about Rand and his danger and his allies. Have you been skimming, my dear? What makes you think the Terrans, Karhinen, and Andorans are solidly behind him? They're plotting and scheming as hard as the Forsaken. Rand is the Dragon Reborn, but this is my country, and we don't need anybody, and so on. And then there are those who don't think he is the Dragon Reborn at all, just a puppet of Tar-Valon. Most of the Aiel may be behind him, but the Shaido are still around, and the bleakness is still taking its toll, since not all Aiel can face up to what Rand has told them about themselves. What makes you think the Sanshin will fall behind Rand? Have you seen any Sanshin volunteers showing up? Carolyn, half of these people are denying there is a problem, and half are trying to be big honcho themselves. Read again, Carolyn. The world Rand lives in is getting more frenzied and turbulent. Damned few are saying, lead because you know best. A good many who are following him are saying, lead because I'd rather follow you than have you call down lightning and burn me to a crisp.
Wait, pause for a second. I would love to see the letter that sparked this response
Mhm.
because he is upset. There's he's upset at the writer of the letter. So,
Yeah, he's getting kind of snarky, which he is known
mhm.
to do in both Q&As and in written
Well,
responses to
you don't
people.
use someone's name that much unless you're either selling them something or you're angry with them. It's like
Mm,
the my parents use my middle name, I know I'm in trouble, right? Yeah,
mm.
that is exactly what is going on here.
Back to the letter, we're about halfway through.
Oh,
As for lack of challenge, I refer you again to the question about whether you really think you know what all the Forsaken are planning, or what Pat Fane is up to. There is a flaw inherent in fiction, one that is overcome by suspension of disbelief. We do always know, somewhere in the back of our heads, that the hero is going to make it through as far as he needs to. After all, if Frodo buys the farm, the story is over, kids. The excitement comes in trying to figure out how he can possibly wiggle out, how he can possibly triumph. In Rand's case, let's see what he still has stacked against him. The Karhinen and Tyrans are, for the most part, reluctant allies, and in many cases, not even that. At the end of Fires, he has Camelin, but I don't see any Andoran nobles crowding around to hail him. Ilion still belongs to Samael. Pedron Nial is working to convince people Rand is a false dragon, and the prophet is alienating 10 people for every one he convinces. As an aside, I found that interesting. We have a definitive number there because
hmm.
you just get, you know, inferences through the books, but I did find that number by the author himself very interesting. Um, Terabon and Eridomon are unholy messes. Even if Rand manages to get in touch with all of the Dragon Sworn, who are not organized beyond individual bands, he has two humongous civil wars to deal with. True, he can use the Aiel to suppress those, but he has to avoid men killing men too much. There are Trollocs waiting to spill out of the Blight eventually. We must always remember the Trollocs, Madral, etc. The last time they came out in force, it took over 300 years to beat them back, and the last battle doesn't give Rand anywhere near that. Altara and Mirandi are so divided in any case that simply getting the king or queen on his side isn't going to work. Remember that most people in those two countries give loyalty to a city or a local lord and only toss in their country as an afterthought. Davram Bashir thinks Tenobia will bring Saldea to Rand, and that is possible since the borderlands would be one place where everyone is aware that the last battle and the prophecies. But even Bashir isn't willing to make any promises, not even for Saldea, much less the other borderlands. And I haven't seen any borderland rulers showing up to hand Rand the keys to the kingdom. Pause there for a second because he's being a little bit sneaky RJ arsehole there because he knows darn well that in a couple of books, I don't know that he has the specifics, but I'm sure it's already in his mind that prologue where we see the Borderlanders
Mm-hmm.
and then they disappear again, and it's like, what the heck are you up to? I have to think he knows that's coming, even if he hasn't written the scene, even if he's only kind of outlined it. I have to think he knows that's coming, and he's giving a little hint here. Um, anyway, where was I? Patton Fane is out there able to feel Rand and hating him because of what was done to him, Fane, to make him able to feel Rand. The surviving Saken are out there, and except for Samael, nobody knows what they are up to and where they can be found. For that matter, who knows what Samael is up to? Elida in the White Tower thinks Rand has to be tightly controlled. The Saladar Aes Sedai are not simply ready to fall in and kiss his boots either. Aes Sedai have been manipulating the world for more than 3,000 years, guiding it, making sure it remembers the Dark One and Tarman Gaiden as real threats, doing their best as they see it to prepare the world for the Dark One breaking free. Are they likely to simply step aside and hand over control to a farm boy, even if he is the Dragon Reborn? Pause there again, because again, I think he is being specifically foreshadowing. Because
Mm-hmm.
remember, something that is going to become important here in a second when we get into Rand's psychology is he says himself, once he regains his full memories and integration, is that what is going to make me win this time as opposed to last time is I was an arrogant elitist as Luce Theron.
Mm-hmm.
This time, I was born into humble beginnings and had to work and learn through humility. That's a big effing deal. So the elites, the White Tower, are going to say, who is this farm boy? We are Aes Sedai. We have been guiding the world for 3,000 years. No, no, you follow us, boy. But that farm boy is what makes him the one who is able to and needs to be the one who leads. Um, Even after Moraine decided he had to be given his head, Sawan was reluctant. And Sawan was in Moraine's little conspiracy from the beginning. And the Sanshin, the last we saw of their forces, they were commanded by a dark friend. As for the Sea Folk, do you know what their prophecy says about the Coromor? Do you think working with them will be any simpler than dealing with the Aiel, say? Now, what and who does Rand have solidly in his camp? Perrin knows what is needed, but he's hardly happy about it. What he really wants is to settle down with Fael and be a blacksmith. Everything else is a reluctant duty. Matt blew the horn of Valir, but it's hidden in the tower, and frankly, if he could figure some way to go away and spend the rest of his life carousing and chasing women, he would. He'll do what he has to do, but Light, he doesn't want to. The Aiel are for Rand, lest the Shido is still a formidable force, but the Dragon Reborn in the last battle are no part of the prophecy of Ruadine. That is all Wetlander stuff. Besides which, they are still suffering losses from the bleakness. People throwing down their spears and leaving. People defecting to the Shido or drifting back to the Waste because of what Rand told them of their origins can't possibly be true. And if it isn't, then he can't be the Kara Karn. Rand has declared an amnesty for men who can channel and is trying to gather the men. They at least should give their loyalty to him. But how many can he find? How much can he teach them in the time he has? How many will go mad before the last battle? There is still the taint on Sidon, remember. For that matter, can Rand hang on to his own sanity? What effect will having a madman inside his head have? Can he stop Luce Theron from taking him over? I know that was supposed to be a listing of what Rand has in his favor. The fact is that he is still walking the razor's edge, barely hanging on to his sanity, and growing more paranoid all the time. Barely hanging on to his putative allies, most of whom would just as soon see him go away, and the hope that then everything would be the way it was before he showed up, confronted by enemies on every side. In short, he has challenges enough for 10 men. I've had people write to say that they can't see how Rand is going to untangle all of this and get humanity ready to face the last battle. What I say is, what you believe to be true is not always true. What you think is going to happen is not always going to happen. That has been demonstrated time and again in the Wheel of Time. You could call those two statements one of the themes of the books. The reason I wanted to read that in its entirety is
because it was very angry.
it was fun. Yes. The creator in his own words, especially when he gets wordy with these long replies in letters, is loads of fun. But there's also a lot of insight there into his mentality, what he thinks of humanity, which is what he's trying to write, which is again the whole point of this. This all started because the show sucked so much because the show doesn't understand humanity. The show is written by people who live in a bubble, a very opaque bubble. And
Mm-hmm.
so they don't understand real human nature. They understand what they think human history and human nature is and should be. Jordan understood what is. And good, bad, or indifferent, he wasn't afraid to write that down and show it to you, which is why we have a lot of characters who are very flawed people, even if they're heroes.
Yeah, just going from the start of that to where he went in kind of being angry. I have to imagine the letter was something to the extent of, and kind of tying it with the comment before, why is Rand having such a hard time when the Forsaken are so stupid? You know?
That's probably a good summation of what it
Hmm.
is. And yeah, and Jordan's point is, what do you mean? First of all, people are dumb. What do you expect to happen? I mean,
Hmm.
that again, that was part of the point of this is taking the trope of the chosen one and turning it on its head, because in the classical sense, Arthur pulls the sword from the stone and he is declared king. Well, in in Jordan's world, Rand pulls the sword from the stone. He is proclaimed across the sky. He fulfills prophecy. And then in the next book, he literally pulls a sword from the stone. Not an accident. That's part of his mythos of all of this.
Hmm.
And people still go, I don't believe it. Or, all right, fine, but I don't want you in charge. I'm still in charge
Hmm.
because people are
Or
people.
or or yeah, that's all well and good, and yeah, you're the dragon, woo woo woo. But how can I maneuver against everybody else around you so I can be just like in the Dark One situation where I can be your prodigal son.
Mm-hmm.
I can be the favorite son, I should say.
Speaking of prodigal son, you have just segued me into, for anyone who noticed, what one of my tabs was there. Because the other reason I wanted to read this rather lengthy response is because, again, let's set this in time in the chronology. This is after Fires of Heaven has been released. He's writing in response to someone who has read this and is, hey, to your point, Rand took out another Forsaken. They're not so tough, are they? And Jordan is saying, are you sure about that? Have you been paying attention? Well,
Well,
something else, Jordan.
let me, since this is a summary on something where we touched on it in depth during that scene. He took out a Forsaken who was human because he could have beat Rand in a fist fight there,
Hmm.
but he had this thing with his personality that wanted to do it a certain way, and that shot him in the foot because Ravine was other than Ishi, the most powerful in the power of the Forsaken. He was massive in physical size. He was skilled, but he had this propensity to finesse that he
Mm-hmm.
tried to use. And he could have just stood up and been like, "You're an untrained shepherd oaf," and just beat the shit out of him, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was probably being overly cautious because Rand did take out Ishamael and
Mhm.
Bilal and
Except Moraine
Agenor.
took out Bilal, but
Yeah, he doesn't know that
yeah.
necessarily. So, but Rand
And the
so
Green Man
far,
took out Agenor.
so far, four Forsaken have been taken out and not been brought back, so far as Ravine knows. So there is an element of justifiable caution there. But to your point, he still has to know I am the stronger man. I am definitely the more experienced one. So there is an element of justifiable caution there, but go back to that scene at the end of Fires when he gets taken out, and that's the closest thing we have to a mustache twirling villain by
Hmm.
Jordan, where he is standing there looking through uh this lattice, looking down at Rand, smiling, enjoying torturing him. He could just kill him, but he's enjoying torturing him because he's a human and he's a
Mhm.
sicko. He's a psycho. Speaking of psychos, something I think Jordan is doing here is foreshadowing why and how Rand's descent into madness is going to be what it is, why it is, how it is. Because Rand's descent into madness is, from, I would say, from my layperson and from what I know of the technical aspects of it, is a descent into psychopathy. And a hallmark of that, that we'll get to in a little bit, because it's something that Robert Jordan has some interesting things to say back when he was on Modern Wisdom, is the using of people as items. You already talked earlier, and you've mentioned before and other things about the lack of empathy.
Mhm.
Well, what happens to Rand as he is rationally, from his point of view, and from, remember, all these things that are lined up against him that Jordan just laid out. What Jordan is laying out here is the rationality for Rand, in his mind, to become a psychopath, because he has to force these people to do what is right. Well, the more he does that, the less empathetic he becomes. And one of the ways I think he's able to save himself is because he has all of these positive influences, you know, going all the way back to his childhood with Tam, going to his first teacher in Lan, but then also that one of the greatest moments in the whole series at the end of book 2, an Ingtar's willing self-sacrifice of, I'm going to redeem myself. I know this is the point where I die, but this is my choice. And we have technical mumbo jumbo here
Yep. So
from
here's some of the
Medicine
witchcraft.
Net.
Yeah. So this is from Medicine Net. We'll give the author credit here. Uh, Roxanne Edwards, MD, Dryden Edwards, hyphenated. Sorry about that, Mrs. Dryden Edwards. And I'm sorry if I misgendered you there. But Roxanne,
Please no, I hate
psychopath.
that song.
Oh, you hate that song? It's very
I do.
depressing. It's very depressing.
So grating.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Psychopaths tend to be highly suspicious or paranoid, even compared to people with antisocial personality disorder. The implications of this suspicious stance can be dire. In the paranoid thoughts, ideations tend to lead to psychopathic person to interpret all aggressive behaviors towards them, even those that are justified, as being arbitrary and unfair.
yep. So,
For instance, when Bashir or when Tam confronts him, and this is the breaking point, right? The breaking point
mhm.
when Tam confronts him and he almost kills Tam because the confrontation was completely justified. It was basically dad trying to dad, and he took it with his paranoid psychopathic nature to be an aggressive behavior towards him. You're trying to stop me.
Mhm.
You're trying to stop me from saving the world and fulfilling my destiny. You're trying to overthrow me or whatever. And he almost killed Tam.
And from the outsider, from the reader's point of view, it's, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're about to kill your father, when all he was doing was trying to put an arm around you,
Mhm.
literally and metaphorically, and say, gosh, son, you've had it rough. I'm glad these people called me in. What can I do to help you? But from Rand's mindset, after all of that he has been through and how that has built up so much paranoia, it is perfectly rational. It may be illogical, but it's perfectly rational for him to think what he thinks.
Well, but add to that where the lesions are, and we can probably associate the Dark One's taint with the lesions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The lesions are preventing him from seeing the emotion and intent, the theory of mind of reading the other person, and only seeing that it is in way of goal.
So one of the things I was going to bring up here, because, and as I said, if you saw my tab, you um isomorphic, I think you're, I don't know how much Sunday school you've had, but you maybe know where I'm going here when you saw that I've got a tab up from Second Samuel. King David is a great archetype. And I went down a rabbit hole recently because I finally got around to watching the Canadian PhD in Bible studies and apologetics, Wesley Huff, who was on Rogan a month or two ago. I finally went down, watched that, and then went down a rabbit hole watching some of this other guy's stuff. And one of the points he makes, that is a point a lot of, for anyone who doesn't know, apologetics comes from a Greek word that I can't remember, and is basically lawyering the Bible. Essentially, is proving that this is real, so to speak. It oversimplification. And one of the points that apologists make is that something that sets the Bible apart from other scriptures, from other religious or philosophical texts, is how bad the characters are. So generally, in the overwhelming majority of cases, you don't have a chronicle of your history, of your mythos, where the heroes are not heroic. King David is in the genealogy of Jesus. He is called a man after God's own heart. And especially at the end of his life, he does some horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
And contrast that with, in early on, before he becomes king, there is a story where, as a young man, he has the chance to kill King Saul, and he doesn't. He goes and he cuts off, he finds Saul while he is sleeping. He cuts off the hem of his robe, and then he goes out on a hill and says, "Yo, King Saul, I could have killed you, but I did not. Stop pursuing me. I have no enmity towards you. You are the Lord's chosen." Fast forward to when David is king and has been king for a while. And now he's got all of the trappings of kingdom around him. He has a harem, he has power, he has soldiers. He became king because he was a warrior king. He was a warrior leader. And now he's sitting back in his palace while his army is besieging his enemy. What does that lead to? Well, this is from this is off of Bible Gateway website and the New International Version. David goes up on his rooftop and he happens to see an attractive woman bathing. And oh, I want some of that. And I'm the king, so I can get that. So send her to me. And they do. And she does. And she becomes pregnant. And David goes, whoa. So he sends for her husband, who is with his armies, Uriah. Send me him. Uriah comes back to, as his king summons him, and he David uses the pretense of what's going on with the war, give me an update, and I'll send messages back with you. Now, take your ease, go home, and then I'll send you back. Well, Uriah is such a devout soldier and follower of his king David and his general, who I believe is Joab. Yeah, is Joab at this point, that he won't go home. As he says in verse 11, Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will do no such thing." Well, shoot. Here we have a genuinely good human being that interrupts David's plans. So what does David do? In the morning, down in verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." the core of this man is still here, because down later, when he is confronted by Nathan, prophet of God, about this terrible thing that he has done, he is stricken with remorse, but he still did it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because Uriah wasn't a person. Bathsheba wasn't a person. They were things that he wanted and could use. This is the descent that we see with Rand. And we're going to see it in a couple of books from when Jordan sent this letter. Because fast forward just a couple of books to Path of Daggers, and what does he say? Who better to pay the butcher's bill than my enemies? Well, okay, except the ones actually getting butchered aren't your real enemies. They're just the poor schmucks that are stuck following those lords and ladies.
Mm-hmm.
But they have become pieces on a board for him to move around. And the core of Rand is still there because he hates himself for it, but he can't stop himself from doing it.
Well, and this is where we get the melding of Lews Therin and Rand together too, because how did he overcome being just a farm boy to lead
Mm,
over all these people? Was that voice that was part of him inside his head?
that's a good point.
And this person who had his big flaws that caused basically the breaking of the world was a heavy influence on the thinking, but they're the same person. It was what, again, back to Jung, it was his shadow self.
That is a good point. Something that just popped into my head about Lews Therin at the voice, as opposed to Lews Therin the man, which is what we see when Rand becomes fully integrated, is Lews Therin is not self-critical. When you fast forward to the last couple of books, especially in the last book when Rand is talking, especially to Min in Avienda, when he talks about these are the mistakes I made as Lews Therin, and this is why I can win now. He's being self-critiquing. He is openly, logically, to some extent, dispassionately analyzing himself and his past mistakes, and then figuring out, okay, how do I move forward? Lews Therin, the voice in his head, is self-loathing. He's not self-critiquing.
Well, and let's fast forward that uh to the Tam moment again. He did the psychopathic thing, but how is Rand different, and what caused the change? He overcame it
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to punish himself for it by killing himself, basically. He wanted to kill himself on Dragonmount. That was the whole reason he went there.
Yeah, but he was also tempted to crack the world like an egg and just kill everyone because this is all
Mm-hmm.
pointless.
Mm-hmm.
This is all off. Everything sucks. It's again back to that letter just after Fires of Heaven. Jordan is laying out everything sucks.
Mm-hmm.
You're to what we're guessing the letter was. You think Rand has it easy? You think he's winning too much? My gosh, look at the world. The world's a mess. And so and it doesn't get better in the next several books. It continues to spiral, and Rand continues having to use more and more of an iron fist to force things into the way he wants rather than convincing and leading. And that just continues to make both the world worse and Rand worse. It
Mm-hmm.
continues into this downward spiral. Um, and this is where do I want to start here? Um, this is
Well,
where
this is where it could be two part, because we kind of started this thing with this is where Rand went bad.
mm,
And we might do part two as in this is where he turned it around and Rand went good.
that's a good point. That's a good place to stop. Then, and let me just preface. So this is where we're going to get into um Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and how Dostoevsky complements Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
and expands upon his thoughts, even though in these rabbit holes I went down, apparently uh, Peterson mentions that some relatively recent scholarship has been done that indicates that Nietzsche probably knew of and had read some of Dostoevsky, but Dostoevsky probably didn't know anything about Nietzsche
Mhm.
because Nietzsche really wasn't big until after his death, unfortunately. Um, but one of the interesting things he said, and he's not in any of the clips that I pulled out that we're going to go over next time, but a couple of times when he talks about Dostoevsky that I found really interesting, and again, why I wish I would love to be able to ask Jordan these things, is because when he talks about, I'm going to mispronounce this isomorphic, sorry, but the brothers Karamazov, in particular, and there's this very interesting parallel between Ivan and I can't pronounce the other's name, Aloysius, whatever the other brother's name that I can't pronounce. There's a very interesting parallel between Moradin and Rand there. And one of the points Jordan makes about the way Dostoevsky writes is that he always writes his antagonists as the stronger character. They have the better arguments. They have the more ironclad logic. But the protagonist is always the better man. And you see that he shows you, he doesn't tell you, he shows you that in the way that the protagonist lives and what he does with his life. And I found that a very interesting parallel because you could say, especially early on before Rand reintegrates his memories and gets the knowledge and the wisdom that comes from being, living for 400 or 500 years or however old Lews Therin was before he died, you know, he's the farm boy. Back to that is the derogatory term. What do you know? You're a farm boy. Whereas
Mhm.
Moradin, the literal professor, Alon, the literal professor, what do you know? He smacks him down every time with his arguments. But who's the better man?
Mhm.
Who lives the better life?
Well, there's a good being having myself one foot in the door of academia and one foot in the door of real life. It's the freaking PhD in breakdancing in the
Oh
Olympics
God.
versus the actual breakdancers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, but when we talk about misery and overcoming things, the PhD and how miserable things are versus the person who experiences misery.
Mm,
The person who experiences misery always has a good outlook on life. They're the farmers that, enjoy when they can get together with their farm neighbors and have Beltane, right? They're
that I mean that's a great point. And why do we start our setting in this farm community and he goes out of his way to, the optimism. He calls it stubbornness, and that's what everyone else on the outside looking in calls it. Is Two Rivers people are stubborn, and yet it never really occurred to me before. It's a stubborn optimism.
Mhm.
They throw that term out there as something of a derogatory trait of, oh, they're so stubborn. Yeah, stubbornly optimistic because the wolves carried off half my flock. Well, I still got half, and we'll do better next time. The weather sucks and my crops didn't grow. Well, we'll replant them.
Why are all these nihilists middle class or
Mm-hmm.
decently well off people that went to college and learned how bad things are
Yeah, it's
versus
a good point.
the person who lives in the bad area and they experience misery every day, but they still
Mm-hmm.
have their barbecues in the backyard and they still
Yeah.
have all of these good things that do happen during these times. When they still enjoy their sports team and all of the everything that goes around that.
Yeah.
So it's when you only study one thing and you never have any experience, you don't realize that there is a counter to that.
Yeah.
And when even if it's very seldom, it actually enhances the greatness of those times.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of misery, to wrap it up here, looking forward, we'll finish up with Rand. We'll go into the second half of Rand next time. And then after that, I think we need to go ahead and get into Lanfear because obviously of the connection of Rand, but then also because she's one of only two good things in the series, and then after Lanfear, I think we're going to be onto the series. I think season 3 will be out by that
Oh.
time, and we're gonna have to start suffering through that.
Well, let's see if
So
we can fast forward through some Forsaken 2 at some point, because I think Semirage is a sadist, so that's pretty simple.
mhm,
Asmodean, we could probably couple those two together because he's the uh, Devil Went Down to Georgia guy. Only he
yeah,
didn't win the violin match, right?
yeah,
You
oh
know,
true, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So that's pretty cool. Masana, we is one we really don't know a whole lot about,
yeah.
and
We know more about what
realistically,
she's doing in the here and now
mhm,
of the timeline than what she was and who she was in the Age of Legends.
Aganor and Bethamel can be paired because they're basically paired through the whole series, and it's
Mhm.
probably going to be more a talk of Erengar, Osengar than it
Yeah,
is Aganor, Bethamel, with bringing in their previous personalities. We already did Grendel. Uh, Bilal is another one we almost know nothing about. So we'll have to get the cheat book for his motivations, realistically.
yeah, and the order and how these pop up may also be influenced by the series because I'm curious what Forsaken are going to show up in season 3,
Well, we're
and so
already
we may talk about
past
them then.
Aganor, Bethamel, and Bilal all dying. In fact, I read an article. I don't know the truth of it. Apparently, we're going to be going through 4 and 5. I'm like, what happened to book 3? Apparently, what happened at the end of the series was supposed to be like what happened at the end of book 3.
A
Only
combination of 2 and 3, yeah.
2 and 3, the endings of it. So yeah.
So are you just writing Kalendor out of the series or what, guys? Come on. That's it's kind of a big effing deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
So
we have the
we'll see.
multicultural IEL. So, we're
But
good with that.
March 13th is still being reported as the drop date for the first episode, or maybe the first couple. We'll see what they do. Sometimes Prime puts out the first 2 episodes and then weekly after that. So
Well,
we'll see when we get
I'll
there.
be at a wedding that Saturday. So maybe we
Oh,
can stew on it. But
oh, good. More time to ruminate.
yeah.
All right. Well, we have that to look forward to, guys. So we will see y'all then. And then next time, social episode. I wanted to talk about the psychology of regret
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
because that connects to that is actually a good tangent between now and next Wheel of Time because so much of what racks Rand and sends him in to this negative feedback loop you could classify as a regret. And we've talked about, National Quitters Day and resolutions. And there's an element of that that goes along with, oh, geez, I haven't done the thing I was going to do in X amount of time. And geez, I suck. And so I think the regret, and I also think that ties into a big problem with kids these days, which is how often do you hear about FOMO? Well, what is that but regret? The
Hmm.
fear of missing out is the potential, the pre regret, if you will. I don't want to regret missing out on this thing. So I think the psychology of regret is a good thing to dig into and see how we can avoid it within ourselves.
Good luck with that because it's also positive in some ways.
Well, we're going to get into that more next time with the stuff Peterson talks about how, you know, like what you frequently say about emotions is, well, the emotion isn't in and of itself negative. It's what you do with it. Same thing with some of these,
Or how extreme it is.
psychopathy, cynicism. These are tools, you know. All right. Well, we'll dig into that next time.
All right. See you later and welcome, Fins, and see you next time, Isomorphic. Anybody else comment and you get a shout out as well. Like, share, subscribe because we hit the 69, so now we can move on to 1,000, right? Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. And 1,000 is important because that's when you can start doing live shows.
Woohoo.
And one of these days, I want to do live shows where y'all can comment as we talking and have a
Mhm.
conversation. All right. Later.